Good morning. My name is Rob Blomberg. I'm a docent here at the Woods Hole Historic Museum. I'd like to welcome you all to the first virtual tour of Woods Hole and the Woods Hole Village itself. We do walking tours in July, August, and September, 10 o'clock in the morning. And in this time that we're in right now, we thought it'd be just fun to sort of have a walk around Woods Hole and update you on some of the things going on in the village right now. So going back from a history standpoint, when you come to the Woods Hole Historic Museum, we like to start in this room here. And we like to start with the timeline itself. As you can see, the timeline of Woods Hole, at least as far as the European settlers goes, starts with Bartholomew Gosnold, who was here in 1602. You want to go back a little bit further? We had the Glacier Age about 30,000 years ago, and then the Ice Age. After that, the Wampanoag Native American tribe was here, and they were the settlers here when the first settlers came from Sandwich down Woods Hole. I'll talk about that shortly. We have some paintings here. Franklin Lewis Gifford, wonderful painter, showed some of the early major events that we had here in Woods Hole. We had 4 whaling ships that were actually built here, as well as having great harbors, the deepest saltwater port anywhere on Cape Cod. So many of the ships from not only Boston, New Bedford, Nantucket, but also the Cape itself were here and ended up getting some of their work refurbishing done in Great Harbor. So Woods Hole is the very southwestern point of Cape Cod. I think most of you probably know that. The Elizabeth Islands reach out from there going out. The only really settled island is Cuttyhunk, also known as Gosnell, at the very end of the Elizabeth Islands. The name Woods Hole, was there a person named Woods? No, there really wasn't. The closest we could come looking through the history was a gentleman from Sandwich who was one of the early surveyors whose name was Woods. The term hole, though, was much easier because a hole actually is a smaller body of water between 2 larger bodies of water. Here in Woods Hole, we have Vineyard Sound on one side and Buzzards Bay on the other side. So I mentioned some of the early explorations that were done here. Bartholomew Gosnold, as I mentioned, was here in 1602. He was on a ship called the Concord. They didn't really land here. They went by there. But one of the things they did notice was black dog, and it's in the ledgers they did, B-L-A-C-K-E. And what was a black dog? A black dog was actually sort of a combination of a wolf and a dog, but the sailors on the ship were able to see that when they went through the passage here. So again, we have the naming of Cape Cod and the naming of Woods Hole. The village itself of Woods Hole, and I'll show you shortly where the first village was actually established. But back in 1677, Jonathan Hatch and 12 other settlers came down from Sandwich. They were Quakers, they were persecuted, and they settled 13 equal-sized lots around Little Harbor itself. What did they do? Fishing, farming. They actually had a salt works a little bit later, but that was primarily what they had. As we go around Woods Hole, a lot of people, very famous names that we have here. Rachel Carson. Everyone knows Rachel very well. Great stature for a waterfront park. We'll see that a little bit later. Another gentleman named Joseph Story Fay. He was a cotton broker. 1850, he came to Woods Hole from Swampscott, north of Boston, developed and bought many of the properties in Woods Hole, and is responsible for many of the buildings that we have here today. As we go a little bit further down, we have buildings here in Woods Hole, and many of these buildings go back 100, 150, 200 years or more. The Woods Hole Library, this is actually the 3rd library site itself, is located right next to the museum. Church of the Messiah, 2nd oldest Episcopal church on Cape Cod. Joseph Story Fay was a parishioner there. He gave the land for that and helped build the church. What's also interesting is the St. Joseph Roman Catholic Church on Millfield Street. That is the 4th Catholic church in Cape Cod. And why was the Catholic church built there in Millfield Street? Because many of the immigrants that were coming from both Italy and Ireland came over to work in the guano factory. The guano factory was relatively close to that. Most of them were Roman Catholic. They needed a church. So Joseph Story Fay was responsible for building that. Most people know at the end of Juniper Point, we have the airplane house itself. We're not going to get quite that far out there, but a very famous structure in Woods Hole. The Eel Pond Bridge, this is almost 200 years old now. The passage that's there, we'll actually make a quick stop there, talk about the hurricanes. Community Hall building right next to that. We'll talk about the Woods Hole Community Association when we get there. As far as transportation, a couple of major things for transportation. Ferries have actually carried passengers from Woods Hole to Martha's Vineyard for almost 300 years. Where was the original dock? It was very near where the Coast Guard base is right now. Ferries continue to expand. Ferry service to New Bedford, Nantucket, which no longer exists anymore. It's Woods Hole right now. The ferry service is only to the Vineyard. And the railroads actually came starting in 1872. Why did the railroads come initially? Two major reasons. One reason was the railroads came because of the guano factory. They transported 16,000 tons of guano. What is guano? Combination of Manhattan, a local fish, and seagull excrement. It was used as fertilizer. It's considered to be the best fertilizer anywhere in the world. And where was the factory located? It was located starting right where the guardhouse is at Penzance Point. So the wealthiest part of Woods Hole right now is where the guano factory used to be. The other thing the railroads did, they brought a lot of the visitors, the tourists, because Joseph Story Fay talked to many of his friends in the 1870s. They came from New York, Boston. They built the houses on Penzance Point, on Juniper Point, going out toward Nobska Beach as well. World War II had a huge influence on the village of Woods Hole. Many of the young men and women from Woods Hole and Quissit were drafted or volunteered. We've got some exhibits here, including my father's World War II jacket. He was in the 10th Armored Division, fought in the Battle of the Bulge. As far as industries in Woods Hole, I mentioned the salt works. The first salt works were in Little Harbor. Fishing, what a surprise, where Woods Hole is located, fishing would be an important part. The guano factory, great photo of the guano factory, as I mentioned. Started in 1863, and it produced among the best fertilizer anywhere in the world. And whaling. I mentioned the fact 4 whaling ships were built here. We weren't the same size as New Bedford or Nantucket, but the fact we had 4 whaling ships built here, as well as service ships being serviced here, we were still a very significant port. As far as tourism goes, again, people have always been coming to Woods Hole, but really it started with the Fays, 1850, 1860. Since then, as far as helping those, peril in the sea. Nobska Light, been here, different colors. It's very interesting looking at Nobska, both when the color it is right now, the white, the black it's been in the past, and hundreds of ships going by, even back in the 1700s. Coast Guard base, this is a key base for the Coast Guard here in Woods Hole. We have the southwestern sector of New England. And people, when they think of Woods Hole, some people think of ferries, a lot of people think of science. First science started actually at the Northeast Fisheries Service Center. This goes back to 1871. A gentleman named Spencer Bear during the Ulysses S. Grant administration started the first fishery center. We really, at this point, if you think back, the Civil War had just ended at that point. There really weren't a lot of scientific institutions. So the fisheries themselves started back then looking at fish population, and how to assist in that area. Following that, we had the Marine Biological Lab. Some of the people who had worked in fisheries decided to work at the MBL. They founded that in 1888. The MBL now, with 58 Nobel Prize winners, spending a lot of time with the research on cephalopods. We'll talk about the MBL a little bit later on. Followed by the other third significant institution, the Oceanographic Institution, started in 1930, went year-round during World War II, helped quite a bit with sonar, protecting ships, camouflaging ships. Most recently, it's known a little bit better for finding the Titanic, also the Air France flight that crashed, the Alvin submarine, very, very involved with that. And a few other areas of research. We have the Woods Hole Research Center, the Sea Education Association, and the U.S. Geological Service. So Woods Hole, very exciting place. This little town of 870 people as of 2010, this little village that we have, very self-contained. And we're going to take a walk around Woods Hole, but again, when you come to Woods Hole, come to the museum, start here, and you see all the wonderful exhibits, and then you can walk around and see them.